All right, Guru Nation, this interview you're about to watch was so good, so nice when you strike gold. It needed its own intro. So, everything that you've ever been curious about in regards to the sponsor CRO site relationship, life of a biotech CEO in the case of James Saperstein, or in the case of Robert Goldman, a study director at the sponsor level. We just get into so much stuff, and it's so important for the times we're in now because it looks like we're headed into a recession. I think, and we get into this a lot, most of the pharmaceutical industry will be relatively safe, clinical research industry relatively safe, but the ones that are hurting are the small biotech, small biopharma companies. And these are two people I had on. One is a founder and CEO of a small cap biotech, James Saperstein. The other, Robert Goldman, from a privately held small cap biotech company as well. And these guys, they have decades of experience, and they've seen the other recession. They've been around in 2008, and they're here now for this one. And it's just so interesting to get their insights and their takes on all this stuff and see what life is like for them. So we get into a whole lot. Clinical researchers, buckle up, grab some popcorn, grab a coffee, grab a water, grab a beer. I normally don't release things Friday afternoons, Friday evenings, but this one's so good that I'm going to, so you can have the whole weekend to digest. And then next week, don't worry, we got so much more content. I've got heat for you guys, Guru Nation. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Take care. Hey, Guru Nation. So we're back with James Saperstein. He's the CEO of First Wave. It's a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company specializing in the development of targeted non-systemic therapies for GI diseases. And we're going to get into the pipeline. It's been over a year since we've had James on. Obviously, the markets are totally different. Is there any good, not necessarily from your company, but from the sector? Can you just speak on what's happening with the sector? And is there light at the end of this tunnel?
Sure, and thanks for having me back on. And yeah, it's been a year, and guys, we've just changed 180 degrees, and mostly because of resources and the market dynamics. I think I mentioned last time I'm on the board of Bio, so I'm pretty close to a lot of things going on in Capitol Hill, including some material things that I can't talk about that I just found out about yesterday. But let's just say there'll be some good news coming from Congress in regards to the FDA. So that is a very positive light at the end of the tunnel that's coming. But more importantly, yes, the sector is just under fire. And I think a lot of it has to do, unfortunately, on a macroeconomic perspective, with the administration. There's just a lot of uncertainty. And when there's uncertainty in the market, people pull their money out. And what we've lost in the last year are a lot of institutional investors, a lot of people who decided biotech is too risky. There's too many questions on pricing. There's too many questions on FDA. Quite frankly, it took a very long time for the Biden administration to fill in the vacancy at the FDA level. And there's been a lot of folks that Scott Golly put in, Golly, in my opinion, was the best FDA commissioner we've ever had in my 38 years in the business. He put in a lot of good people. They're all exiting at this point, so that concerns the investors as well, because they're not quite sure what's going to happen. For instance, with accelerated approval, with orphan programs, with 505(b)(2, there's an aggressive move to get more biologicals on the market. Even the generic companies are not quite sure, what studies they need to put forward to get approval. So when there's that much uncertainty, not only in the investment community, but in regulatory and policy, guess what? Everybody moves their money to the sidelines. They'd rather sit on cash than invest in companies. Now, for instance, I'm out raising money now. This is public information, so I don't mind saying it. We filed an S1 earlier this week. So the terms of my deal are out there, and I've been talking to investors for the last couple of days. And their concern is not with my company. They love what we're doing. Their concern is what's going to happen to the share price. If I put in money today, is the share price going to be minus 40% tomorrow, because basically where we were last year, $100 million cap company, we're down to 3 or 4 million now. Now we've lost complete value in our company, but I can tell you not much has changed from the clinical perspective. In fact, adrenaline, our main asset, has moved forward. I can talk about that afterwards. Niclosamide, which is another one of our assets, because of lack of funds, I put that on the back burner for now because we simply can't afford to move forward on the trials.
And
And
niclosamide, that's the one that's in the phase 2 for ulcerative proctus sigmoid.
proctitis, yeah.
Okay, okay.
And so that, going back to your original question, that's the state of the market. I'm not the only CEO. There's hundreds, I mean hundreds of us who are making decisions like this,
I
who
see.
have to peel back on clinical programs and peel back on people. Novartis just announced huge layoffs in California. The whole industry is laying people off. I don't mean to be the sayer of doom and gloom, but it just hasn't been that
No, no,
great.
we need to get into that. So Novartis, where did these layoffs happen in the research, in R&D, or in sales, or where?
In R&D, they basically, in California, they acquired a company and basically laying everybody off. I forgot
I
the name
see.
of the company, so I
I
apologize.
see. I
But
see.
I do read about the layoffs. Biogen is laying people off. Some of the big biotech companies are laying people off as well. My company, we've reduced our force by over 60% in the last year. I've had no choice.
Mm.
I've had to close down my California office. A lot of investors say, well, James, your burn is still pretty high. Why are you burning so much capital? Well, those of you who are in the CRO world know, well, just because a study stops doesn't mean that I don't have to pay the CRO. There's still investigator fees that need to get paid. There's still project management fees, all those things that need to happen. Those people still need to get paid. I mean, they put their work in and their time in. And closing down offices isn't that easy. I closed our French office. Took me 2 years to do that. French law, you have to keep people gainfully employed. In California, which is the toughest employment laws in this country, we had to close our office as well. I'm still giving legal explanation as to why we closed it.
Wow.
It's
And
not enough.
it's actually perfect that we have Robert Goldman on as well. Robert Goldman, you guys may recognize him. He's been on the shows before. He's a study director, sponsor level. You guys are the perfect two guests to have on because um, we're seeing at the CRO side and at the site side. I mean, as a site owner, it's busier than it's ever been. And at the CROs, they can't hire enough CRAs. Like they just cannot. There's a labor shortage. And what you're telling me is at the sponsor side, especially at the smaller cap sponsors, it's the opposite. And you're putting studies on pause or not even starting some studies.
Dan, I'll jump in, and James is absolutely right. As the audience knows, I also work for a small cap company. We're privately held at the moment. Obviously, the IPO was planned, but with these capital markets, had to be postponed. But I talk to our chief medical officer, our CEO, our CFO, our COO, on a daily basis, and we also have had to make decisions just like James just described. What asset do we focus on? Do we postpone an asset we thought we were going to get EUA for because it's that ship has sailed? The different pathways and strategies to get your NDA filed are really pressing based on available finances. And like James said, the investors have their money on the sidelines. Um, you know, Having a company pre-IPO in phase 3 of development, you would think 5 years ago, maybe forget 5 years ago, 3 years ago, that's a very enticing investment opportunity. You're in phase 3. Depending on the indication, it's high likelihood, still potential to fail, but it's more promising than in preclinical or phase 1 or phase 2. But we're experiencing the exact same thing. And because of funding, running these clinical trials, like James said, it's extraordinarily expensive. The pressure is incredible. The vendor costs, the pass through costs, the direct costs, just to maintain. And then, of course, reimbursing, paying your investigator grants, maintaining the thresholds needed to ensure the continuity of a study, especially for a lead asset, is unbelievably stressful. And these concessions that James has described in terms of closing offices, laying off workforces, nobody enjoys doing that. But you're left with your back up against the wall where you have no choice. So it's interesting because, Biogene and ESI, you see all these, I mean, go on LinkedIn, right? You see hundreds and hundreds, let's call it thousands actually, of jobs in our industry that are available. Yet there's other influencers that you see. If there's so many jobs available, why are the interview processes so laborious? Why are there 19 different stages? And it seems like nobody can fill those jobs. And then on the same token, the CRO side has this insane resourcing shortage. I oversee two different CROs for a phase 2 and a phase 3 program. And both CROs, for my counterparts, when we have these, managerial discussions, if you will, they both indicate resourcing is a tremendous problem. So turnover is huge. Competition for talent is huge, but it's a completely different ball of wax on the sponsor side. Just to echo what James said, it's absolutely the way it is.
Can
Go
I
ahead,
add
James.
something?
Yeah, please.
I think Robert's touched upon something incredibly important because of what your audience is normally listening to. So on the CRO side, why is there so much turnover? And I agree, it's tough to keep people on your team at the CRO. I think at the CRA level, Dan, you mentioned there's just a huge amount of opportunities. CRAs just aren't staying. And I think it's the new workforce. I think it's the new normal that's happened, post-pandemic, that people don't really want to travel that much. And if they travel, they want to stay within a regional area. So doing a national study or an international study, it's tough to get people. It's tough to get CRAs on site. They rather do things via Zoom. And as we all know, those of us who've been in this business for a long time, the CRAs are the most effective, are the ones who are on site, talking to staff, looking through the notebooks, looking through all the information that's there. Dan, you have a couple of sites, so it's important for that face-to-face interaction. And I'm not going to sound like an old man because I've got kids, in their 20s and millennials, but it's tough. It's tough to get people that who are used to growing up and with social media, doing face-to-face, getting in someone's lap. Which is where the core business really is. And I think that's why we have a fair amount of turnover, especially at the lower levels of the CROs. It's tough to fill those positions.
So I'm trying to draw comparisons to this in 2008, because I remember in 2008, the big pharma. So I remember we had a study with Sanofi, and then almost overnight, like when Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, Sanofi Aventis called us and said, hey, no more patient visits, early term everyone. And then this happened like two other big pharmas too that we had studies with. I'm not seeing that this time. What I'm hearing is, and I have a theory that maybe after this recession, big pharma gets bigger because they're signing more lucrative deals with smaller cap companies, or just acquiring them, like you said, acquiring and then laying off redundancy. Do you think that's a possible outcome of what happens here? Like somehow the industry still stays busy, but the smaller caps kind of at the cost of the smaller companies in the space?
Well, look, I can tell you wholeheartedly, I worked for 17 years in large pharma out of my 38 years. And my last, actually then Gilead, which was small at the time, but now it's a large biotech. So I was at the level where I was making these decisions. So, and being part of the teams making these decisions. Absolutely, you're 100% correct. The big pharma is going to start acquiring these small compounds. They are all over the place. Their BD teams are very busy. In fact, the upcoming JP Morgan meeting in January, lots of folks are considering, do we go, do we not go? I can tell you almost every hotel is sold out. I'm assuming that big pharma has already purchased all the hotel rooms. But what's going to happen? Having been to big pharma, I can tell you this. Yes, they're going to acquire these companies. It's going to be a 50% hit rate on what works and what doesn't work. and then they get into their resource allocation meetings in the middle of the year. If you don't have the right champion, and people move in big pharma too, so if you don't have the right champion, you may have acquired a company for $2 billion. It's no longer a strategic option. So that's gone. So it's a lot of write-offs, and that's really what you saw happening in 2009, 2010, was a massive amount of write-downs from big pharma, getting rid of people, getting rid of companies. So however you define it, it's a very mass consolidation that's going to happen. And that's not good. At Bio, that's what we talk about. We talk about the fact that there's probably going to be 150 to 160 less drugs approved in the next 10 years. That's a lot when you think about how many drugs get approved per year. If you get 25 drugs approved per year, then on average, you're looking at 16 over the next decade per year that don't make it because there aren't enough companies to move them forward. And it's got very little to do with the CROs or anything else out there, the sites. It has to do with how they're going to spend their money. Because at the end of the day, big pharma, big bio is looking at profitability and return on investment to the shareholders. And if they've got to cut the overhead, they will in order to get to their quarterly numbers. So you're seeing a whole lot of consolidation. I'm hoping that Congress comes to its senses. Everyone's talking about price controls and all that. If that happens, you can forget about the biotech industry in this country. It's happened in Japan. It's happened in Europe. Those industries have this. I don't mean it'll go down to zero, but it'll go down by 60, 70%.
Which is gonna directly inhibit bringing these life-changing therapies to those who need them. I know it's cliche, but that should concern everybody watching this video, and encourage you to write to those decision makers, because when small biotech is either consumed by large pharma, or James, I actually wanted to ask you a question, not to get sidetracked. Are you seeing licensing deals and opportunities because small cap companies are so desperate for cash consumption and an infusion? You as a CEO, would you potentially entertain now something you wouldn't have entertained 2 years ago in terms of, hey, I'm going to come to you and I want to license out one of your assets that you can't push forward due to financial restraints? And I mean, do you see that happening more and more? Is that the same as consolidation? Because you're losing the rights to that because you're licensing it, but you're desperate for an infusion to keep one of your assets going.
Absolutely. You're seeing a whole lot of that happening around the industry. However, there's a caveat. I'll give you some insider information. There's a caveat that some people in the rest of the world don't see. And that is when you're trying to license a product out, unless you've got a gazillion contacts, someone like me, I've been around a long time, but I still try to use a third party to help me broker that out. And like any third party, if your deal size isn't big enough, they're not going to touch you. So what you're seeing, the deals that are getting done are companies that have a lot of cash to do that, or their market cap is sizable enough that they're going to, the third party brokering this will get enough capital or return for their time. So what you're not seeing is just a lot of smaller companies that aren't able to get themselves on some kind of roster because no one's going to touch them. They're just too small. So a lot of these companies are just going to wither on the vine. Now, you said something interesting, Robert, before about your private company. SEC, there's a ruling just came out on Friday, I think last week. SEC is putting a kibosh on a lot of IPOs right now with market caps or potential market caps of 50 million or less. So you're not allowed, you can't go IPO. So what happens to those companies? And what happens to those products? Some of them are in preclinical, or they're not fortunate enough to be in phase 3. They're in phase 1. They're doing the safety data. They're down to $1 million in cash. And they have no prayer because there's no private market right now and there's no IPO market available to them. So going back, Dan, I hate to be the doom and gloom. However, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is anything but, they talked about price controls. So prices are going to go up. I'll tell you that, because basically the way the law reads, it's Medicare negotiation for just Medicare patients. It's not price negotiation for private patients, private insurers. So what the pharma companies are going to do to try to kind of keep their profit margins where they are is they're just going to raise prices in the private insurance. So the everyday person who's actually paying money into Medicare is going to wind up paying more, because what are the insurers going to do? They're going to pass that cost on to the consumer through copays and other functionalities. So what Congress is doing, in order to, the Democrats, I hate to blame the particular party because the Republicans voted on this as well, in order to get votes, they're basically sacrificing the middle class again. Because price controls are bad, no matter which way you look at it. The best thing to do is to bring pharma around the table, which I have to tell you, I've been part of those meetings. We've been, during the Trump administration, we were there trying to negotiate with them on drug pricing. So it's not that the industry does not want to negotiate, they do. But we're not willing to negotiate unless the insurance industry comes in at the table as well, because they're the middle people. They're charging a lot of money. It's kind of like going back to if we wanted to negotiate pricing on clinical trials, we wouldn't do it just on pharma. We want the CROs in, we want the sites in, we want all representation so that we could all work together to say, okay, what's a reasonable profit? What's, without, conflict of interest issues with the FTC coming in. So we like to speak in generalities, but to go out and flat out pass a law that's going to price control drugs is insane. And it's very, very, very bad for consumers. Imagine if you did that in other industries. It would be horrible.
And it's you see so many political ads on TV right now. I live in Arizona, and I'm just going to call out Mark Kelly right now. A proclaimed self-independent, but he's really not. He sides, mostly with Democratic viewpoints, which is, I'm not going to get political here either, but I'm just saying from that perspective, he advocates, I'm standing up to big pharma and I'm price control. It's amazing how the public doesn't understand how pricing even comes about. Mm-hmm. It's not about greed. Okay, the general public doesn't understand the amount of money it takes from preclinical to get a drug across the finish line, so it ends up in your pharmacy, so that you can go and pick this drug up and take it. It's hundreds of millions of dollars. The manpower and hours and political hurdles that have to be met, and the bureaucratic hurdles that have to be sought through it's incomprehensible to a layman, and they're just all about like greed and price. And so if we could if they could understand the things that James goes through, that our companies go through, the hurdles we have to navigate, the burn that we have, the sacrifices we have to make to bring therapies to market, to change lives, then they would understand where this pricing comes from, as opposed to just saying, oh, we're going to have this Inflation Reduction Act. I'm going to trust what I'm being told. And by proxy, the price of a drug is going to come down to something more affordable, which is not going to happen for the reasons James just absolutely is correct in indicating. It's going to go up. And it's not because of greed.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we're about to launch a study. I have cystic fibrosis, same sites that we used before, same principal investigators we used before. The study went from $100,000 a patient in 2020, 2021 to $134,000 a patient. Same exact site. It's probably going to be the same exact patients. But who am I to go to the investigator and say, why are you charging me this much? I mean, what's the bottom line is, these investigators, they have costs, their insurance rates went up. Getting patients transported's gone up. All of these things have gone up. So I'm very sensitive to the sites, because these are our bread and butter people. These are people that help patients get better. So collectively, as an industry, we have to try to work better and work and be a little bit more reasonable. Now, I know you have a lot of CRO listeners and viewers, Dan, so I'll try to be very politically correct. Um, you have a lot of CROs, large ones that have sold themselves to private equity firms and things of that sort, and their profit engines. They don't quite understand healthcare as well as they could, so their prices have gone way, way up as well, trying to glean as much profit as possible. Because if First Wave doesn't do business with them, they're going to get another small biotech to do business with them tomorrow. And so it's cascading. What you're seeing now is big pharma starting to bring a lot of clinical ops back internally. So I think you might start seeing some pressure on pricing with the CROs because the Mercks, the Sanofis, they're hiring and building more, going back to the early 80s where they're bringing in more internal people.
And you know what, to piggyback off of that, Dan, sorry to interrupt here, but James is absolutely, again, correct. I mean, right on the money. But there's an advantage to that, right? So as a sponsor representative, okay, we have very little control over, who is allocated to our study, what kind of portfolio. These CROs are allocating resources to the large accounts where there's a $500 million portfolio being conducted over 5 studies, and the back to bill ratio, they've got 3 billion in work that hasn't even started yet. They're getting the A+ performers. Companies like me who are coming in who, we do have another phase 3 study, we're not exactly 100% sure when we're going to start it, it's all based on funding. They're giving us the C squad, okay? And I'm not talking about any particular study. So if any of your viewers are watching and they know who I am, and it's not about you, so but if you think
it might be about you.
It might be about you.
We don't care. We're not pro CRO on this channel.
Well, and so the problem is their fees and their direct costs, like James said, are going through the roof. And the reason to internalize your own staff is because you can control it way, way better. And I have more control over who's coming onto the study. I constantly get entry-level CRAs who are brand new hires proposed for my pain study. Pain monitoring a pain trial, a subjective data, is very, very, very different. It's a whole different ball of wax than looking at any objective endpoint, right? It either cleared or it didn't clear. The number went up or it went down. Pain is all in the eye of the beholder, right? It's all subjective. That's why we have all these different scales to corroborate and, blah, blah, blah. But my point is, many sponsors, even smaller ones, have the ambition. I can tell you from my point of view, we would love to internalize and completely cut out the CRO. But again, to have the resources to build out that infrastructure, having the SOPs, having the work instruction, having everything internalized from data management to ClinOps to pharmacovigilance to safety to medical to biostats to data management, having that all internal, you have a control over who's working on your study versus the CRO. Well, there's nothing in your MSA indicating you require X amount of years of experience. So it's like, you can only push back so much before it actually starts working against you. You can only decline 4 or 5 resources, but then again, the FDA expects us to have the appropriate oversight of the CRO. And in an audit situation, would it ever come down to, well, hey, why did your company allow this person who was very underqualified based on training and experience to be monitoring or leading your type of a study? What am I going to come back and say, well, that's all the CRO had to offer me? They're not probably going to buy that excuse.
So it's interesting that Thermo Fisher bought PPD last year and no one really talked about it. That's a sponsor acquiring one of the biggest CROs there have ever been. There's only like 4 left. Who's going to buy the other 3, and then what's going to happen?
Well, you raised an interesting question. So PPD is they've done a couple of my studies. And in my last company, when I was a contributor, I wound up suing PPD and won. This is before they were acquired by Thermo Fisher because of their project management costs were just off, they were quadruple dipping. And that's what they do. So if anybody's out there running companies, I always tell them, just look at the fine detail and make sure that your controller's involved with everything you do. But yeah, I mean, PPD is a fine example. I don't mind talking about a study we just closed. I'm not going to say anything out of school, but to Robert's point, we did a COVID trial. They had a very young CRA. Trial wasn't moving at all, so I decided, we have 6 sites in the Miami area. I went down myself during the pandemic and had a dinner. We're all sitting there with our masks on. I flew in my CMO, and we talked to the site managers ourselves. And I speak Spanish, so I did some of it in Spanish. And
you did a site visit as the CEO of a biotech?
I did. I
love it.
I brought them all to dinner, and because we weren't enrolling, and PPD was giving me all sorts of excuses. The CRA actually came, and she sat next to one of my people. I got to tell you, our enrollment, and maybe Omicron had something to do with it, but our enrollment increased like 80 or 90% within 2 weeks of having that dinner. And where we projected to close the trial in April of this year, we closed it in January. And that dinner was held in November. That's how quickly we enrolled. To the point, I've got a very good personal relationship now with these sites. They call me. I mentor one of these guys who owns one of the sites. I think that's what Robert's talking about. When you have personal involvement from sponsor, and you bypass the CRO a little bit, you get things done. And we're seeing that more and more. I'm a very hands-on CEO. I like to see results. I want to get things done. More or less, not because that's who I am, but it's more of, that's what my investors expect. I mean, they give us their hard-earned cash. They want to see results. And if something's not getting enrolled because people are twiddling their thumbs, or because the CRA doesn't feel like flying to Arizona to do a site visit, what the hell? I mean, we've got to be in there. We've got to manage that. And I've got a ClinOps team as well. There's only a couple of them, so they can't be everywhere. But they expect the CROs and the CRAs to be out there doing what they're supposed to be doing. That's what we're paying them for.
Exactly.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars.
This is
month.
a month.
month.
This is such an interesting conversation. I mean, I didn't expect it to go this way, but I think it's good because it speaks to a larger scale of what's actually happening. I don't think investors, James and Robert, but James especially because you have a publicly traded company, I don't think investors understand all this stuff. And if they actually look under the hood and see what you guys are dealing with, I mean, I've always said anecdotally as a site owner, I much prefer to work directly with sponsors than with a CRO involved. It's always more pleasant. Somehow the CRAs are more on it. We get better communication with the sponsor, and that's just anecdotally. But it's nice to hear from people at the top of these sponsor organizations, kind of expressing similar frustrations with the CROs. So, are we at the point now where the CROs have gotten too big, and maybe at the same time, site networks are increasing, and these site networks are getting sophisticated? I mean, you've got some of them investigative research organizations. They're basically a CRO without calling themselves that, but they have like 80 sites. Like my company, DSC, we have 80 sites across the country. We own maybe 3 or 4 of them, but the rest pay us a monthly fee. We help them grow. And we go to a sponsor and say, hey, Takeda, we have 80 sites. Let us know what indications you need. Boom, boom, boom. So, and there's others too, like doing it way more sophisticated than we are. Do you think that's possibly a future, like for at the end of this recession, like on the other side of this? Or do you think the CROs are here to stay?
Well, I would ask Robert to chime in, but my feeling is your sites and these coordinated sites that are huge, you need more to add to your sites. You need pharmacovigilance, you need data monitoring, you need all those things that the CRO can provide, because we can't do that as a small sponsor. It's too expensive for us to do it. And it's actually too expensive for us to outsource it as well. There's plenty of small companies that do these types of things, different like quality, all these types of things. However, the CROs have built themselves into a one-stop shop, and I think your sites are going to compete with that. It's a tough one, And I think if the sites, if you want to get more and more profitable, you're just going to add more cost to the clinical trials. And eventually, there's not, it's, when you get price controls that are coming, that takes the elasticity. I'm using an economic term here, but it takes the elasticity out of the model. Because at one point it's going to be a finite price. All of us, we do, big pharma down to small companies, we do our Excel spreadsheets and our forecast to see what we can do, what things should cost. And if we can't go out, I mean, I can tell you all my conversations today, every single investor asks me at the end, what's the use of proceeds? If we give you capital, where are you going to use it? How are you going to use it? How long is it going to last? And that's all based on a forecast I have. So fast forward to 2024, and I've got enough capital through 2024, and I have forecasted a 10-15% increase in clinical costs by year. But if it winds up going up 30%, I'm screwed, which is what I've done with niclosamide. I put it on the back burner for now because I simply can't afford these trials.
And I'll piggyback off of that, Dan. I think CROs are here to stay, but I will give a different type of a viewpoint. I think these IROs and these large SMO networks are really doing a disservice to our industry in the fact that you are losing quality controls. I have worked with some of the sites that I'm currently working with a decade ago, and I don't blame the PI, but the quality of work that continues to come in day over day is exponentially lower than it was 10 years ago. So as places grow, whether it's a CRO, whether it's a biotech, whether it's a site SMO, whether it's an IRO, you lose the quality control, right? So Dan, let's just use Yuma Clinical Trials as an example. Right now you have the oversight and the fine-tuning ability to control and ensure the data quality Alcoa standards that any sponsor would expect at the end of the day, right? When companies start getting this large and they have no choice but to hire a body to fill a role, and I hate to say it, but it just seems like all you really need is a pulse these days. And you see the direct result in terms of quality. That's what it's all about. Simple things being missed, important protocol deviations being had. And as a sponsor, you own these things. So when these things end up happening, you take it to the bank with you, and then you end up explaining why your intent to treat population is 75% larger than your per protocol population, and then your modified intent to treat population is just as is a little bit right underneath your intent to treat population, meaning from a stats perspective, and then you're trying to write your CSR and you're trying to indicate statistical significance against your endpoint. It all comes back to quality. So CROs are here to stay, but they're going to have to adapt and have better quality control measures. That's why if you look on LinkedIn, you see so many process improvement positions, whether it's a director of process improvement, process improvement from clinical development, protocol design, implementation. But like James says, companies like, smaller cap companies, we don't have the money to bring in the resources. So it's a double-edged sword. It's too expensive to do it internally, and it's also getting to become too expensive even to outsource it to the CROs. And the type of people that are performing in these roles are just not qualified. I'm being honest with you. They're just not qualified to be performing at this level. I'll give you an example. I am mentoring I do a little bit of mentoring as well. And one of the guys that I'm working with, he's super ambitious, super hungry, comes to me. I helped him, work on his CV. He gets an interview with AbbVie. And I was like, who dropped the ball that you're interviewing for a lead data manager level 2 position when you're you have no business even being a clinical study coordinator, let alone a lead data manager. And I asked him, I'm like, do you even know what a data review spec is? Do you know what a data monitoring plan is? Do you know what, would you know how to produce and write this type of a plan? Would you know how to create CRFs? Do you know what edit checks would be required? He's like, no, but maybe they would train me. But do you see what I'm trying to say, Dan? Like how did he slip through the cracks? And I felt bad because he was excited about it, but I had
Supply
to
and
say, look,
demand.
it's supply and demand, right? And you're looking back, but on the other hand, like, you don't want to go into a position and set somebody up for failure.
Hmm.
So, but the point is, the sponsors are trying to internalize as much as they can to cut out the CRO, but it's a completely different animal for companies like I work for James' company, where it's just, what do you do? What choice do we have when we're bidding out a study? You send out an RFP to 4 or 5 CROs, and you're listening to them in the bid defense, and you're asking, what are the must-haves? What are the nice-to-haves? What are the, well, this would be good to have? And you're negotiating budgets down to bare bones. But like James said, I don't have his experience, of course not. But I can totally see how his investors are coming to him. And if he under forecasts because he didn't anticipate a 40% inflation, you know, is that his fault? Absolutely not. But guess what? At the end of the day, now he's got no capital to continue the development of his compounds. And I can tell you that's happening very, very frequently across a lot of small cap companies, even privately held companies. Like, that miss is mission critical to the outcome of the company, the outcome of the study, the development program. And so how do you go backwards and forecast what's going to happen in the future, right? Site budgets that were negotiated in 2021 and middle of 2021, call it Q2 of 2021, they're night and day difference today.
Yeah,
They don't meet the standard of what was fair market value then. So what do? You got to do clinical trial agreement amendments, and you got to do, everybody wants an increased overhead. Standard overhead 20-25%. Now I'm seeing 35 and 40%, Dan.
I
I'm
know.
seeing I'm seeing budgets that are like mind blowing. I just saw one the other day for a COVID study. They wanted us to pay 20% of the investigator's salary because he's dead. Like, I've never, I mean, this, I go to the
Wow, they're
CRO, I
asking
go,
for everything.
20% of the salary of the coordinator, of the pharmacist, of the investigator, of the, like, they want us, they want you. So if the investigator's making 350,000 a year, it's a one-time non-refundable payment of 70 grand. Plus,
Wow,
Right, but
go ahead,
they're
Jay.
let
negotiating
me
wrong.
just take a step back. What changed the whole industry, and I truly believe this, it happened while I was a big pharma, was the birth of the procurement agent. In big pharma, they started bringing in these procurement people to make decisions on costs for CROs, manufacturing, people who are finance backgrounds but had no qualifications in terms of quality. So price wound up winning, and you had to be, I'm a little older than you guys, so you probably didn't experience this, but you had to be a qualified, vendor in order to get any business in the environment. But once you got it, you were in for life. It's very hard to get you out. So what's happened? Let's talk about this. 25 years later, is you've got these PPD and these large CROs, Covance, that have these deals with Lilly or Roche and Merck and whatever, and they just price 10% above every single year. The procurement agent signs off on it. Okay, that's reasonable. And what you realize is you probably need 4 or 5 studies to do that one that they signed off on. And these costs have just gone way, way out of control. And the wrong people are watching this. You need better people. Even at the big happens, what Robert's to, I agree with him. They're going to try to get away with murder with the small companies. They're going to ask you for whatever they can, and if you don't do it, they're going to go to a bigger company.
So do you think that with this recession, do you think this is a necessary correction to kind of weed out some of that fat, right? Like from the middlemen, from the procurement agents, do you think this is necessary? Will we see that contraction? Because, like I just said, big pharma is getting bigger. We are seeing more studies. So what's the outcome here? Like, does it get better?
That's a great question. So, number one, an answer in two parts. First part is, a lot of people in the pharmaceutical business will say, "Well, you need a contraction. It's kind of like the Godfather movie. You got to have a war every once in a while." And many of these, there's too many companies, there's too many public companies out there. Maybe some of them should die on the vine. Okay. Well, my answer to that is, and I'm still completing the first answer, is the FDA has said that these companies have viable products. They filed an IND. Had they not had a viable product, the FDA would have rejected them outright. So who are we to say that 10% or 20% of these companies should die on the vine? Because maybe these drugs are viable. The fact is they don't have the right economic model to bring them forward. That doesn't mean they're bad drugs. They might be excellent drugs, and you might be throwing the baby out with the bathwater. That's my first part of the answer. The second answer is a much more conspicuous, which is big companies never realize that what the result is going to be of what they're doing. Basically, so it's the ostrich sticking their head in the ground. Big pharma, they're hearing price controls, they're hearing all of this stuff. I can tell you unequivocally, 10 years ago, sitting at bio board meetings, we were already telling Sanofi and Novo, do something about, and Lilly, do something about your insulin prices. Because especially me, I was very outspoken. I remember when we launched Humulin at Lilly, it was $12.37 a vial. I still remember that from 1983. So, and the fact that Humulin's selling for $250 a vial, something's incredibly wrong with that. And that was 10 years ago. And they're like, nah, this will blow over. That's big pharma. That's what they think. This will blow over. Don't worry, it's going to go away. Now everyone's getting their butt kicked in over insulin prices. They've lowered it down to $40 a vial, even before the Biden administration said anything. The prices are already lower, but it's too late. The dike is broken. So now they're bringing another price control. So what happens with it, to answer your question more completely, Dan, the CROs, Thermo Fisher is a huge, huge company. Do you really think that they might even for a semblance of a second say, I think we need to correct our prices because if not, we're endangering the next 10 years of our business? They don't think that way. They think everything's cyclical. This will all blow over. We're going to continue getting enough customers. Or they go to their sales or business development people say, if we cap this cost, what's it going to do? And they'll be told, don't worry about it because their bonuses depend on it, their stock options depend on it. We're going to go out and get you more business. Don't worry about it. So big companies will never contract their pricing. They're just not going to do it. And the quicker the Congress understands that, that's called free enterprise. That's what capitalism is built on. The faster they're going to realize that the only thing you're hurting is the end user, which is the patient. Big CROs, big pharma, I'm telling you right now, I know their CEOs, they don't care. They say they care, they don't. It's about returning ROI to their investors every quarter.
And neither do politicians.
Neither do I agree.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but man, that is just spot on.
Wow. So when do we talk about first wave biopharma?
Oh,
James, this is amazing.
I'll make it quick. I mean, you heard a lot of the story. We spent 14, 15 months looking at our formulation with a Drulipase. I can tell you we've decreased our cost of goods on the product by 80% in the last 14 months. So we're about to launch another study the second half of this year, within a couple of months. That's what I'm raising capital for right now. It's going to be a small study for cystic fibrosis patients. We already have potential partners on the table. They're waiting for that outcome. That study will be hopefully by the second quarter of next year. We hope it's a positive outcome, and then we're off to the races. We'll be able to raise more capital from our partners and be able to go back to niclosamide. Now, niclosamide is a primary example. Robert will shake his head at this one. So when we acquired First Wave Bio, we had a proctitis study that I talked to you about last time, Dan. We had 1B data was excellent. Patients showed better remission rates versus budesonide, which is out there. And then the rules changed. So when we got to phase two, the FDA is requiring what's called a central reader now, meaning that anyone who's you need a third party to review every single endoscopy, every single piece of
I
study that
hate
we're
that.
doing. And that happened midstream. So guess what? The study wasn't powered for that, the phase two study, nor can we go back to look at all the patients we've done before because we don't have the film. So a lot of this was done in Europe. So we stopped the study. We opened up the trial. We stopped it. Our
Wow.
investigators are really pissed off. I mean, the CRO was angry as well. We had to have a payoff scheme to pay them off for lost business, and we had to pay off all the investigators. It cost us $1.5 million to just shut down the study and not get any more patients. But the FDA tweaked something, and that happened.
Wow. They
Um,
tweaked it mid-study or
well, they tweaked the rules, and we just happened to be in the middle of the study.
oh
They don't
my
really look
gosh.
across. They don't really look across the industry to see who they're going to hurt. They don't really care. It doesn't matter to them. They figured this is what we want. In the GI studies, and the division made a decision, and it happens. It happens all the time. Big pharma, it's a rounding error for them. They're able to
Wow.
deal with it. A company like us, it's disastrous.
Do you
So
think
my
big
share price
pharma
went from like $6 to $1.
do you think big pharma, I mean, is this like a way for them, everybody knows they're famous for lobbying. Do you think this is a way for them to keep new entrants, like more barriers to entry, basically? Like, oh, let's throw this central reader requirement in the middle of a study.
No, I don't think so at all. I think big pharma, wants to make it as simple as possible.
Hmm.
It's more profitable for them. They certainly don't want to get small companies like me, in trouble. They want us to be successful so they can buy our products.
All right.
So I think we're all in the same boat. We all want an FDA that's functional, an FDA that is not in confusion. Give you an example. I'm going to set Robert off, I think, again. But the problem with FDA right now is most of it is virtual. So all of their meetings where used to have, they have 115,000 employees. So where everybody used to meet in Rockville, Maryland, and sit there in the offices and have these meetings, let's go down the hallway to a conference room and let's talk about this. Now they're all on Zoom. So if you think the FDA was not productive before the pandemic, and they've put a bunch of resources over to COVID, and those resources aren't coming back, and literally the top layer of the FDA is being dismissed by the new FDA commissioner, and everybody's still virtual, and no one wants to come into the office. Think about how productive a 115,000 person organization can be. So I would tell you, pharmaceuticals, big pharma, small biotech, Robert too, we're pulling our hair out right now, wanting to make sure that we have a functional FDA. Congress was thinking about getting rid of user fees, which is the way we fund new employees for the FDA. Imagine that. Like they're saying, well, if we have user fees, then you're biasing the FDA. Like what? I mean, yeah, I think if we were paying for a particular employee to work on our case, there's an argument there, but that's not. We all throw in user fees. It goes to a pool. The FDA
Right.
uses the pool to hire people. It's just
Ridiculous.
politics have gotten in the way of delivering medicine to people, and that's a huge, huge problem. That's not going to go away anytime soon. Going back to your first question.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, look, there was a party that was very keen on helping the FDA. I can tell you, I've met the senators, Warren Hatch, and people like that. They were wonderful. They didn't love us, but understood what our purpose was. The Trump administration changed all of that. They went to war with the industry, as you might remember. They had all the pharmaceutical CEOs at a meeting with Trump, and they all resigned from that committee because of the things that Trump was asking for, which is crazy. And the Biden administration has come in and said, okay, well, the Trump administration has already ticked off the pharmaceutical industry. This is an easy layup for us. And that's what they've done. They've taken advantage of it. But it's very, very bad for patients.
Yeah, I remember once Trump suggesting that we don't need an FDA. I remember hearing that. I was like, wow. Okay,
yeah, brilliant.
So first wave okay, so basically most of the questions were, as you would imagine, like negative. they're worried about reverse split. They're
Mhm.
wondering if there's any good news to report. You just did report some good news. Um,
I'm happy to talk about the reverse splits. Do you want me to
okay.
answer some of those questions? So, yeah, those are unfortunate when we have to do a reverse split, but unfortunately, our market cap dropped to the point that we were going to get delisted by NASDAQ. In fact, I could tell you the company almost went under earlier this year, even though our trials were doing fine. But we had one negative reading in the COVID trial that didn't work. Happens, as happens. And our other trials were doing fine, but our stock price kept dropping. And we had no choice. We met with NASDAQ. We had a panel hearing with them. I was there. And they said, okay, you've got literally, they gave us 11 things that we had to do. And one of them was getting our price back above $1. And the only way to do that is by doing a reverse split. There was just no other way around it, or we were going to get delisted. I can tell you 10 out of the 11 things we've done already. Even the NASDAQ panel said, we're giving you an impossible test, and you got about a 1% chance you're going to make it. So there was a time that I was thinking about selling off our NASDAQ listing. I was trying to figure out a way what to do for the shareholders. But we've got one more thing to do, and that is to raise $12 million by the end of November. And we're in the midst of doing a raise then. And then once we get that done, NASDAQ will put us in full compliance. So I understand the investors' concerns, but at the end of the day, the goal is to get a pace to the position we need it in and sign a very large deal with a large pharma company, and then all will be well in the world, and they're going to get the return on investment.
So the pharma can get bigger. Yeah. Are you confident about that happening, raising the money?
Yes and no. I mean, it's a tough market. I'm hearing a lot of no's. It's it's going to be probably what's called a technical deal. What that means are hedge funds. You have hedge funds that have algorithms that come in. These guys, there's probably 10 or 11 of them. They print money, and they're the ones who will come in, and they can afford to do this kind of deal and take this kind of risk. But unfortunately, these hedge funds put a lot of pressure on the stock price when they come in. But to me, we have to live to fight another day. A dollar is a dollar, and the cost of capital is what it's going to be.
Jeez. I mean, it sounds, and thank you for your time. I mean, it sounds like so stressful. My question would be like just on a macro scale, like, why do you keep doing this? Like, is it worth it? Like, is it worth all the stress at the end of the day? I mean, you've been in this industry. I'm looking at your LinkedIn right now. So this is not your first rodeo. Oh,
My wife asks me the same thing, and I'm working from home today. And if she was listening to this, I let her in my office. She wants me to quit every single day. The fact is, I retired in 2018, so financially I'm fine. But I got a call from a banker to look at this opportunity. I read about the pace. I really think it's an unmet need, and I've got a couple of friends who have cystic fibrotic kids. I really think this is going to work. So at the end of the day, kind of like my conversation with Robert or before the podcast, I'm in it to help patients. So yeah, I agree, Dan. It is extremely stressful. There are days. I'm Jewish, I should say that, and I can tell you when we did the stock split, the amount of Nazis that were sending me emails, the effing Jew and this and that, were unbelievable.
wow.
So it's not only a professional hit that we get, it's a personal hit as well. Somebody emailed my daughter. They found out who my daughter was. So she works at Pfizer.
Seriously?
Seriously, there's a lot of nuts out there. So you
Wow.
wonder why you do it. Now, do you want to be in the public eye or not? But at the bottom line, for me, it's about helping patients. I really don't do it much for financial gain at this point. I put my own money into the company. This summer, I went without a salary in order to make. I haven't told that to shareholders. My board knew. No one else. I smile. I hope to be able to laugh at the end of the drug comes forward.
Wow. You heard it here first, guys. And yeah, you're right. These people on stock twits, I mean, some of them are, they're doing due diligence and they're actually commenting like constructive things, but there's so much like 80%. Hey,
Mhm.
oh, this guy's doing it to get rich. Of course, I have no idea, but I've interviewed James 3 times now, and I don't get the feeling that that's the case. And he said he's put his own money into this as well. So I don't think that really happens at the smaller company. I think it happens at the big ones actually, where it's not their money.
It does,
So
and I think one thing I want to educate your audience about, and educate you guys because you may not know this. So when you look at a 10K, which is our public filing, and you look at everybody's salary and their stock options and all that. For instance, this shows me making about $1.2 million a year. That's simply not true. And the reason why it's reported that way, the auditors require, and the SEC requires you to basically to take all your stock options and they place a value on it when they're priced, and that's what's attributed to what you earn. The problem at First Wave is all those options are way underwater. I can tell you personally, I've lost over $500,000 that I've invested myself, that I bought my own shares and invested, and they're all underwater. It's gone. So if you want to get my wife angry, you bring her in here and she'll talk to you about it. But the bottom line is that's what people on stock twits when they're doing their diligence, that's what they read. They see, okay, this guy and CFO, they're all making $1 million because all the stock options that were given to us are that's what they were valued at. Now, I don't mind saying this because we're a publicly traded company. When I first started the company, I was awarded a bunch of stock options based on performance to the tune of 3% of the outstanding options, and that's what people see. My value right now is 0.35, so it's less than a third of a percent of what I own in the company of a $2.5 million cap company. Do the math. So it's basically my board, and actually all the investors are only going to come in if I get a lot more stock options because that they see that as an incentive. If I continue to do well, or my management team does well, we'll get rewarded with the stock price going up. That's the only way we get
Yeah.
rewarded.
Yeah.
But our stock price has gone way down. But from an auditor perspective, take it from me, it goes across all pharmaceutical companies, even private companies. When you value them, the management team gets value on the stock options. So I don't know Robert's CEO. I don't even know what company he's in, quite frankly. But say he's making $350,000 a year in salary, which is market. They probably gave him a bunch of stock options in a private company that when they did the valuation of the company, say it was worth $40 million when it was formed, 5% of that company was worth, $800,000 to him. And that's, so they said 350 plus 800, 1.35 million is what he's worth. And that's what investors see. But I'm sure if you ask for the CEO privately, he'll say, I'm not getting paid even close to that. So, but that, I understand the confusion and why people get ticked off, but they need to really understand finances and where the money really is. Sorry for the long answer, but I thought that
No,
might be valuable for investors.
thank you for
no,
sharing it. I
that's a
think we need a
brilliant.
platform for this kind of
Yeah.
CEOs to come on biotechs and explain. So thank you for that.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, that's spot on, and you can obviously tell that James is not in this for financial gain. As a matter of fact, it's probably doing the opposite for him, and he's in it for one reason, and I would call it passion. And that's really what drives me on a daily basis as well. And I have ambitions to be like James one day. So James, you're an inspiration.
You'll get there.
Yep, and that's really all I have to say. But again, this has been very informative, and I hope Dan, your audience, really listens to the entire podcast because
Oh, they better. We're gonna force them to listen.
spread the
We're on
message.
TikTok too.
Yeah.
TikTok, Instagram. They're gonna listen.
Spread the message because these lessons discussed during this conversation need to go viral so that the broader public, even if they're not in our industry, understands the driving motivational factors and why we do what we do on a daily basis. Because I ask myself, like, gosh, I'm so stressed out myself, and I'm not even close to in James' position answering to investors, but it's all out of passion.
Yeah, I agree. And I've got 2 kids in the business now myself out of my 4 kids. We all love what we do, and it's all about helping patients. That's the bottom line. You know, I I don't want to sound morbid, but I say this all the time. I can go to my final resting place knowing that I helped a lot of people, and I was a difference maker, and that's really all that matters to me. Money comes and goes; it's material things. It's more about helping your fellow human beings. That's really what counts.
What's the
Yeah.
legacy and the impact you're going to leave behind, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, every time I interview James, I get that. And a lot of these smaller cap biotech CEOs, I often joke with my PI, like, hey, let's work with these smaller sponsors because they're not corrupted yet. Like this is how we talk about at the site. Like, let's work with them now before Pfizer buys them. And so yeah, so thank you, James, so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your candor. Thank you for your passion, for setting us straight as investors, shareholders, um, people in the industry. Thank you for the conversation on the CROs, and hopefully things get better, man. Hopefully, I'll be rooting for you, and we'll be following up for sure.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
And thank you, Robert, for being co-host. Amazing insights as well. You were the perfect co-host for this episode, so thank you as well.
My pleasure, Dan. Thanks for having me as well. And James, great to have you, and wishing everybody the best.
Yeah, Shana Tova, Robert.
Alrighty.
Like, subscribe, comment,
Thanks.
share. Bye bye, guys.